You're listening to the Monocle Daily, first broadcast on the 16th of January 2025 on Monocle Radio.
Can Qatar yet add a Middle East ceasefire to its list of diplomatic successors? US President Joe Biden bows out on a somewhat gloomy note. And is the UK really a nation of thwarted dog groomers? I'm Andrew Mueller. The Monocle Daily starts now. Hello and welcome to the Monocle Daily, coming to you from our studios here at Midori House in London. I'm Andrew Mueller. My guests Terry Stiastny and Charles Hecker will discuss the day's big stories, and our weekly letter from came back with me from Melbourne. Stay tuned, all that and more coming up right here on the Monocle Daily. This is the Monocle Daily. I'm Andrew Mueller, and I am joined today by Terry Stiastny, the author and political journalist, and Charles Hecker, senior partner at Control Risks and author of Zero Sum, the Arc of International Business in Russia. That title again, Zero Sum, the Arc of International Business in Russia, in all good stores now. And Charles, there will be an event on Tuesday.
That's right. I will be sitting on a panel as part of a discussion about capitalism in the age of conflict. And that's going to be at the Frontline Club on Tuesday evening at about 7 p.m. at the very lovely Frontline Club.
Are tickets still broadly available?
I think there's still some room.
Excellent, excellent. So that venue again, the Frontline Club, etc. I'm sure they have a website where you can find all that stuff. Terry, welcome back. You don't have an event next week that we could seamlessly move along to?
No, sadly not. I'm working on it. Okay. There's going to be events.
In that case, we will have to go to this week's default introductory banter topic, which is, what did you in fact end up doing for Christmas?
I spent Christmas in the Cotswolds, which was very pretty, and then New Year's in Venice, which was even prettier. And it was beautiful, and I saw some amazing art and got some sunshine, which there wasn't much of in the Cotswolds.
That is the fanciest answer to that question we have had yet. It was like Cotswolds and then Venice. Unless, Charles, you can top that.
I'm afraid I can't compete. I had the now famous Crouch End vegan Christmas, which featured it was a mushroom Wellington. But when I called it a mushroom pie, I was sort of, very roundly castigated by my very gracious hosts. But it was fun and tasty.
And to our non-London listeners, Crouch End is pretty much exactly what you're thinking of when you think of the kind of suburb where they would serve a mushroom Wellington. I think that's fair to say.
Spot on.
We will start in the Middle East, where there is both a ceasefire promised and a war ongoing. Israel's cabinet is yet to vote on the ceasefire deal, and there are reports that Hamas is seeking to make last-minute tweaks. And further to that, reports from inside Gaza suggest that at least 80 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli airstrikes in the 24 hours or so since the ceasefire was announced. And the mediator at the heart of all of this, Qatar, specifically Prime Minister Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman bin Jassim Al Thani, is seeking to build on its success in forging the agreement by demanding that Israel withdraw from the portions of Syria to which Israel has helped itself following the generally unlamented demise of the regime of Bashar al-Assad. Charles, where right now would we place our levels of confidence in any of this ceasefire thing actually happening? Obviously, a lot of people within and without the region have invested a great deal of their credibility in it occurring, but that's not necessarily a guarantee of anything.
If we were looking at what's happening right now, today, after the announcement of this proposed ceasefire agreement, I think we would have very little question that it will not go through. Hamas is making some last-minute demands. The Israeli cabinet has pushed back its meeting to discuss and ratify the ceasefire agreement, and there has been fairly aggressive bombing of Gaza today. And so this does not, look or sound or smell like a peace agreement in any way.
Is it possibly the case, Terry, that for both both Israel and Hamas are the proverbial protagonist who only owns a hammer and therefore everything resembles a nail?
I think I'd be maybe I'm wrong, but I'd possibly be a little bit more optimistic than Charles is. I think this might be a lot of last minute. We're going to get this down to the wire. We will do a deal in the absolute last possible second that's available. And I think there probably is a huge amount of pressure being put on them by, internationally, not least because you've had presidents, you've had prime ministers, you've had sort of foreign secretaries stand up and say, we believe this is all going to go through, and everybody is going to have egg on their faces if it doesn't. But I think, until you get the absolute last details sorted, everyone is going to say, well, why should I act as though there is a ceasefire until it's actually all signed on the dotted line?
And depressingly, of course, it is not unheard of in the annals of human conflict, Charles, for fighting to escalate when a ceasefire is believed imminent, because people are trying to buttress their positions before the guns fall silent.
Well, that's right. And just for clarity, I do think that something eventually will happen. It's just that if you look at the situation as of this moment, it is not hugely promising. But you're right, Terry. I think that the amount of international pressure brought to bear on all of this sort of does augur for some sort of resolution of this problem, not to mention the fact that we're going to have a change in the U.S. administration next week. And I think that was one of the stimuli behind the sort of sudden haste towards this agreement, although I shouldn't say really it was very hasty, because they've been talking about this sort of thing ever since the war broke out. But something will happen, and Andrew, you're right. You get your last licks in before the door closes.
I did want to talk a bit, Terry, about the role of Qatar in this. It has become kind of a peacemaking mediation locus, not just in this conflict, but in many, many others as well, and with some success to their credit in Sudan, Chad, Eritrea, Djibouti, the Darfur peace deal back in 2011. What appears to be their secret?
I think it's a willingness to do it. It's partly location. It's partly having lots of the parties, whether that's, the Taliban, whether that's Hamas, whether there's given a place where they can come and stay and have their sort of outposts there where they can talk to people. I think it's a willingness to be open to all of the different sides in these conflicts. And I think last but not least, it is probably money. There is a question that they can invest. They're a country that has got a lot of money to invest in other places in the world, which has in the past given them something to trade. And I think everybody is keen to use Qatar as a kind of base where you can have proximity talks on a big scale with lots of nice facilities and a fairly nice place to do business.
And Charles, assuming that they are not acting entirely from pure-hearted altruism, as nation-states very rarely do, what actually is their angle? Why do they want to be involved like this?
They've invested an enormous amount, not only in their sort of diplomatic stature, as Terry pointed out, but just think of all of the soft power investments that Qatar has made in polishing its image. Let's not forget that the World Cup was held in Qatar, and that very clearly is to the country's benefit and its international standing. Qatar, of course, is a huge energy power. It has the world's largest gas reserves, and it's got about a half a dozen American university campuses in Doha. So it's invested in Washington think tanks, in London think tanks. The sort of the public relations and soft power effort on behalf of the Qataris to put themselves in a very crowded region with global and regional superpowers. This puts them very squarely on the map as a place where you can do business. You can learn French at Georgetown University if you want, and you can buy a few tankers of LNG if you fancy.
But just finally, and to follow that up, Charles, are they trying to carve themselves out? I don't know, that is part of this giving themselves the kind of prominence that perhaps buttresses their own security and their own safety.
Yeah, it's interesting because Qatar's position today as this sort of negotiating superpower is an amazing recovery from where it was just a few years ago, really within recent memory. Up until 2021, for about 4 years, Qatar was entirely isolated by all of its neighbors. There was an embargo around the country, and it was, as a result of its relationship with the Muslim Brotherhood, which really angered Egypt, one of the sanctioning parties. It was getting close to Iran, which really bothered Saudi Arabia, one of the sanctioning parties. And it was just basically a rising Gulf power, which sort of angered everybody. And so they've come a very long way in a very short time. and I think are hoping to take that even further.
Well, to the United States now, which has been treated to the farewell address of outgoing President Joe Biden. This set piece is usually a fire hose of patriotic syrup, honour to have served, greatest country in the world, God bless America, etc., and can usually therefore be safely ignored. Sometimes, however, the departing commander-in-chief checks out with a warning, as Dwight Eisenhower famously did in 1961, expounding on the danger of a coalescing military-industrial complex. Biden, who may remember hearing Eisenhower's valedictory speech, indeed who may remember hearing Andrew Jackson's, took just such a foreboding tack, fearing the dominance of a tech-industrial complex at the mercy of a super-rich oligarchy. Here is some of what the president had to say.
An oligarchy is taking shape in America of extreme wealth, power, and influence that literally threatens our entire democracy, our basic rights and freedoms, and a fair shot for everyone to get ahead.
Terry, is it not always kind of annoying when politicians do this? I mean, if only he'd known somebody who might have been able to do something about any of this. If only he'd spent, I don't know, let's say the last 4 years occupying Earth's most powerful office.
This is kind of pretty much exactly what I was going to say. I mean, I've hearing those clips of it, and I did sort of want to shout and say, and what did you do about it? Which I'm sure you could well have, shouted at Eisenhower as well. Well, you probably helped to build all of this up. You helped to create this complex. What did you do, when it was in your power to try and stop it? Because I can't imagine that Biden was particularly hostile to technology bros and to the people he's now calling oligarchs. And yes, okay, you had to hand over, you didn't want to, you lost. But it does really sort of beg the question of well, what were you doing all of this time to stop it?
Or alternative question, Charles, as answerable as you are for the entire United States of America at this table, when has the United States exactly not been at the mercy of super rich robber barons?
Yeah, I'm outnumbered at this table. So I had to do the math to see whether Joe Biden was around to hear George Washington's farewell speech. And I think he just missed it by a few years. But, it has been ever thus, Andrew. I mean, as George Washington made the nation's first presidential farewell speech, he essentially touched on all of the same issues. Honestly, I mean, it doesn't take a very long stretch of the imagination to see that he was struggling with some of the exact same things. He warned, as the first president left office, he warned against partisanship. Well, okay.
Well done.
He asked America to be friendly towards foreign nations and its neighbors. Well, we'll see how that goes.
About people taking over power and not handing it over and not wanting to quit.
Well, exactly. Well, he did make a very big point about the fact that, that he was a term-limited president and he thought that was the right thing to do. Precisely right. And then, he sort of thought that the country would overcome any errors that he may have made. And so, from the Department of There's Nothing New Under the Sun, we have always been dealing with essentially the same issues from the very beginning of the Republic.
Is it also possible, Terry, that in Biden's speech there's a certain amount of sour grapes? I mean, I'm just wondering, it's a parallel universe question, if there had been a major social media platform absolutely in the tank for Vice President Harris, would this have gone the other way?
No, I don't think that social media, it can influence people. I don't think ultimately people were totally voting on the basis of whatever owners of social media platforms pushed their way. I mean, I think people were voting on economics. They were voting on how things had affected them personally, and they were voting on a candidate that for whatever reasons they didn't feel all of that enthused about. So I think you can say, it's bad that people have got, this oligarchical control. Yes, it certainly is. But the question is, how much did that really change people's votes? I'm not sure how much it did.
But is there, though, something different, Charles, about, if not necessarily about the idea of super-rich oligarchs, but these super-rich oligarchs? Was reading today an estimation that between them, the three of them, Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, are collectively worth $1 trillion. And they are all obviously colossally influential media moguls. Is this something quantitatively and qualitatively different from what we've seen before?
And all three of them, by the way, will be on the podium at the Capitol.
I know, heartwarming, isn't it?
For the inauguration, exactly. And I believe that all of them, either from company money or from their own pockets, have contributed to the inauguration itself and to the logistics and all the balls and the cocktail parties that will come afterwards. I think we have a tendency to think that whatever's happening right now is the worst it's ever been. Eisenhower gave a farewell speech and warned against the threat of the rise of the barons of the military-industrial complex.
Indeed so.
And so... even though we're not supposed to think that everything is as bad as it's ever been right now, I kind of do feel like it is a little bit. And it's just the reach and the scope and the influence that these individuals have, and the fusion of that influence in the private sector with a channel directly into the public sector, into government, is something that I think the watchdogs of the world, the voters of the world, the citizens of the United States are going to have to keep a very, very careful eye on.
But are they going to? Because just finally on this, Terry, President Biden also fretted about the corrosive power of online misinformation and disinformation, the lies, as he put it. And he's not wrong about that. But the problem with those is that people enjoy them.
Yes, I mean, that is, throughout the history of disinformation, what has always worked is telling people rumours about things that either worry them or enthuse them. It's been variously pornography, the threat of disease, the fact that your leaders are corrupt. This is the playbook of disinformation, and that's why it often works, because they hear those stories and they want to tell them to someone else.
Well, to Ukraine now, which is a very brief summary of the journey undertaken by UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer. He's making his first trip to Kyiv since becoming Prime Minister in July. Meeting President Volodymyr Zelensky, Starmer pledged the UK to a 100-year partnership with Ukraine and further averred that the UK's support for Ukraine would never waver. By way of reminder of what Ukraine remains up against, Starmer's visit was at one point soundtracked by air raid sirens and explosions as Russia launched yet another barrage at the Ukrainian capital. Charles, the timing is probably not coincidental, 4 days before Donald Trump is sworn back in as President of the United States?
That's right. I mean, this is the time for Europe to step up and talk about security guarantees. And that's exactly what happened when Starmer went to Kiev. And we should also say that Kiev probably presents him with an easier political landscape than number 10 and Westminster. So this was a safe space for the prime minister. The problem is that there is yet no European consensus on what to do when the moment arrives when the Trump administration throws Ukraine under the bus. And that is one of the most likely scenarios of what's going to happen in the peace accord that's going to be hammered out between Trump and Russia's Vladimir Putin. So the UK wants to protect Ukraine. The UK has been one of the leading supporters financially and operationally and morally of Ukraine, although the Prime Minister came short of guaranteeing any troops on the ground. He offered training programs and he offered additional, material and financial support. But between the UK, between France, between Germany, and the rest of NATO, there is absolutely no accord about what to do for a security guarantee with Ukraine. And this is an enormous problem.
I mean, do you detect any indication, Terry, that Europe as an entity has the means or the will to do this without the United States if it has to? I mean, we may be about to find out.
Yeah, I think the difficulty with this at the moment is you've got a lot of people who aren't really closely focused on Ukraine. I mean, you've had Starmer and Macron talking about Ukraine at Chequers, and they seem to be pretty much fairly much on the same page. But the trouble with, you've got Germany got an election going on at the minute. They're not really in a position to be taking those decisions. And so although you can try and forge this sort of UK-French link, there are a lot of other countries, some obviously, the further east you go, more people are more likely to be saying, we actually need to be, continuing our support for Ukraine, and other countries are going to be lagging on that a bit. And I think, the danger at the moment is, as Charles was saying, that you've got this is a sort of symbolic thing by Starmer, who hasn't been to Ukraine before, and that's a thing that about the last 3 British prime ministers have sort of pulled out when they're in domestic trouble. Let's go to Kiev and and it's going to stand by Zelensky because that looks good for us. But there's a lot of waffle in what they've been talking about. This sort of 100-year partnership pact, it says nice things about culture and justice and technology cooperation, but it's not. Yes, there is money that they are talking about, but this is quite vague, and it's not really enough if you're Ukraine.
I mean, if, Charles, as you were suggesting, the United States does in the next few weeks usher Ukraine under the bus or attempt to force some sort of grubby compromise under which Russia will presumably be able to keep all, if not or most of what it holds, does Europe actually have any good options? Is America going to be just allowed to make this decision and Europe will have to live with it? That does seem kind of ridiculous.
Well, I think that, negotiations so far are taking place over the heads of Europe. I mean, this is a Washington-Moscow conversation so far. We've also learned, by the way, that Putin and Trump allegedly have spoken during this interregnum, and while Trump was out of office, the two allegedly have had a number of conversations, and they're already engaged in some level of discussion. This seems to be taking place over Europe's head without its participation. Moreover, it's without Ukraine's participation. And you know the famous saying that, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And so, there will come a moment, I suppose, where they let Europe in on the fun. But at the moment, that doesn't seem to be happening.
I mean, and just on the quiet, Terry, might there be in European capitals an amount of relief if Ukraine is indeed ushered under the bus? Because the alternative for that, or alternative to that, even if you are a national leader sympathetic to Ukraine, the alternative is having to say to your people, this could get quite icky. This is going to involve greater cost, greater sacrifice on our part. We are at barely one remove at war with Russia, and we need to start thinking like that.
Yes, I think it's difficult on a number of levels. I mean, firstly, the idea that you might have some kind of European peacekeeping force on the ground. How much are people going to want to commit troops, even if it is supposedly just peacekeeping, to being in Ukraine or to monitoring a ceasefire? And also, this whole pressure on defence spending. I mean, look at the UK, look at Germany. They're all saying, we've spent a lot up until now. We just simply can't afford, in the absence of economic growth, to keep putting this level of money into our defence commitments and to keep backing Ukraine. So in that sense, they might think, OK, that's one less thing we've got to worry about in terms of spending.
Well, it being still just about that time of year at which people dream of a fresh start before resigning themselves to another 12 months of the same enervating grind, an attention-seeking corporate entity which, in keeping with daily policy we are going to spite by not naming, has released what it claims are the most popular choices of putative British career switchers. In pole position, and in keeping with the stereotype of nation of animal lovers, is dog groomer, followed by project manager, electrician, teacher, and phlebotomist. Now, I will admit, when I woke up this morning, I did not know what a phlebotomist even was. Does anybody else?
This is a person who takes blood.
It is. It is a person who takes blood.
Well, there's a job I would not do, no matter how much
I was just going to say, Terry, in your designated role as person at the table responsible for the United Kingdom entirely, what the hell is wrong with you people? Why is this
dog grooming? I can tell you, this is a license to print money though at the moment, because if I try and put my dog into grooming, right, it's like trying to get a hair appointment in a fancy West End salon. There are waiting lists. There are, that will be £60, please. Thank you very much. It costs more to get your dog a haircut than it does a human haircut.
God, what are we all doing?
You have to, you have to wash dogs that may bite you, and then various other things going on. But it's a really good business, and there are so many more dogs at the moment that I think being a dog groomer, I mean, I actually know someone who has set up a dog walking, training, grooming business and is doing very well and is very happy and gets out in the fresh air a lot.
What career had they changed from?
It was something to do with property. I can't really remember what they did before, but I'm clear on the dog grooming.
Although, Terry, our alert listeners will have noticed that you skated over my question, which was, what is the deal with you people?
We have a lot of dogs. We love dogs.
Not about the dogs thing. You well know I'm not asking about dogs. I'm asking, Terry, about phlebotomy. What is the deal? What is the deal with you people and phlebotomy?
Regular hours, more money in the health service, good pension, and you have to take people's blood out of their arms. But Yeah. Not for me, but I'm glad people do want to do it.
Basically, I just enjoy saying phlebotomy. Charles, have you ever considered an abrupt career switch?
I consider abrupt career switches every day. Well, I've made an abrupt career switch. Well, it wasn't so abrupt. These things either come by design or they come by accident.
You didn't used to be a phlebotomist, did you?
I was one. Can we say how many times are we going to say phlebotomist until the? But the trick will be though is to remember how to spell phlebotomist.
Oh, that's easy.
Okay, I won't do it on it. We won't do it on air, will we? But
I mean, I can. I've got it here in the script.
Yeah. I have had a career change. I mean, I left my role at Control Risks, I should say publicly, to write a book, and so that was a bit of a U-turn in the way things go professionally. I think what stands out about this list, though, is that there's nobody on this list of the 10 most sought-after career changes in 2025. There's nobody here that really makes anything. This is all. I mean, the rest of the list is sort of classroom assistant, personal trainer, digital marketer, and all honorable professions. And I'm not casting aspersions in the slightest. But nowhere on this.
You can cast aspersions a bit on digital marketers. That's all.
Well, once I understand what a digital marketer is, then I'll be able to.
What depresses me about this list, Charles, is like no one's saying astronaut or pirate.
Yeah, but there's not a course you can look up online, is it? How to become a pirate? That's what.
There is literally an application form you can look up about becoming an astronaut. You can do this. I mean, I haven't applied myself because I feel that it would be a fool's errand for a number of reasons. But we did want to check out by asking you each in turn that if you were going to pivot at this point in your careers, Terry, you first of all, if not to phlebotomy, what would you choose?
So I've been thinking about this far too much, and I thought, chorus line, Bob Fosse, jazz hands dancer. Probably my best days are past me. Probably I wouldn't really make it at this stage. But the thing I really want to be an art detective. I want to be one of those people on like Fake or Fortune who goes around researching the provenances of stolen art.
That is a good answer.
Yeah, and trying to either get it back to its owners or to put in galleries. I'd love that. And it's archives and it's art.
I've interviewed somebody who does that. It did make me kind of think, wow, what a cool way to make a living.
You probably get to go to Venice and Paris and do
See,
nice
my own choice, though it is sadly walled off to me because I am not Finnish, does still date from where I was, I think, almost exactly 6 years ago, which was aboard a Finnish icebreaker in the Gulf of Bothnia doing a story for Monocle magazine. I commend our listeners to the film, which is still on our website somewhere. And yeah, I kind of got into, after 10 days, gazing at the frozen straits into the parallel universe of myself as an icebreaker captain. I think I could get way into that.
You guys are so highbrow.
Yeah.
If I were to do this yet again, I'm going way low. And I don't want to work that hard. I want to be someplace where it's always sunny and warm. I've watched a lot of episodes of White Lotus.
Murderer?
I want to be a murderer.
Well, yes, aside from being a murderer, I think a sort of a nice job in hospitality involving a beach and an ocean and some palm trees. I mean, I'm going low.
Would you like to run one of those bars that are actually in a swimming pool?
Oh, yes. Oh, that's perfect.
Serving cocktails with little twirly straws and umbrellas.
Yes, with the umbrellas in them.
Yeah,
yes, precisely.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm sticking with astronaut or icebreaker captain. But Charles Hecker and Terry Stiasny, thank you both for joining us. Finally, on today's show, our weekly letter from is a letter from me, from Melbourne, where I am clearly not now presently, but was quite recently. I've long believed that one of the quickest ways to learn anything about a place is attend a local sporting event. It's certainly one of the quickest ways to learn anything about Melbourne, a city enthralled by sport like few others. In the summer, you could take in the Australian Open or the test match that begins every Boxing Day at the Melbourne Cricket Ground.
And again. That's all the way. Can you believe what you're seeing? I can't. I cannot believe this.
In the winter, you should attend a fixture of Australian football, a code played by nobody else, and a game like nothing else.
50 here for the Cats. Cox and Hawkins. Cameron just brilliant. The way he's able to sweep and goal.
But pretty much any time of year, you can go to the races. Melbourne is the historic heartland of the Australian turf, and meetings are usually well attended enough that you'll make up in people-watching bounty what you'll lose to the bookmakers. Granted that in recent years, Sydney, with all the artless flash that Melburnians loftily disdain in its rival city, has inaugurated the two richest races in Australia, the Everest at Randwick and the Golden Eagle at Rose Hill. But however substantial the cash on offer, neither will ever have the prestige or the gravitas of the great marquee races of Melbourne, the Caulfield Cup, the WS Cox Plate and the Melbourne Cup.
Mark Zara, who's won the race over the last 2 years. The 164th running of the Lexus Melbourne Cup, and the field is set to go.
The Melbourne Cup is the big one. First run in 1861, it is colloquially known as the race that stops the nation. It is literally the race that stops a state. Melbourne Cup Day, the first Tuesday in November, is a public holiday in Victoria. The Melbourne Cup takes place at Flemington, a racecourse in Melbourne's western suburbs. Its stadium arranged so that Melbourne's gleaming downtown skyline serves as backdrop to the action on the track. You would struggle to get into Flemington on Melbourne Cup Day itself. Upwards of 90,000 giddily overdressed people fill the grandstands for that. And though Flemington itself is lovely, an idyll of wrought iron fences and rose gardens, it's tough to heartily recommend it on any other day, due to the Victorian Racing Club's inexplicable insistence on berating racegoers with incessant, terrible, deafening music broadcast through the world's tiniest PA system.
Isn't the best place to find the lovers, so the bar is where I go. Me and my friends at the table doing shots, tripping fast, and then we talk slow. And we come over and start up a conversation with just...
Which still leaves the visitor to Melbourne with options: Caulfield, Cranbourne, Sandown and Moonee Valley. This particular Saturday, I'm off to Moonee Valley, not least because on this particular Saturday I have a direct interest in proceedings. A few years back, my father, who lives in Melbourne and has always been keen on the horses, announced that he'd bought a 2.5% stake in a yearling which he thought had been a bit of a steal at auction. Amused by the idea, I went in for 2.5% as well, which is to say 2.5% of the horse's modest purchase price and 2.5% of his monthly upkeep in return for 2.5% of what he might win in prize money. And over the journey so far, we are, altogether improbably, in front.
Williamsburg takes the lead from a Noah Star and Magnus Spin. Magnus Spin's kicking back. Magnus Spin has worried Williamsburg out of it. Magnus Spin a half head to Williamsburg.
The horse's name, if you didn't catch it, is Magnuspin. I didn't choose it. As is often the way, it's a portmanteau of his parents' names, Magnus and Luxaspin. And he's racing today at Moonee Valley over the 2,040 metres of the Big Max Buggies Handicap. I didn't choose that name either. I disembark the train and join the crowd trekking to the course with some grounds for optimism. Of Magnuspin's 5 wins from his 28 starts before today, 2 have been over 2,040 metres at the Valley, one of them in considerable style.
200 metres to go with still a good lead. About 3 lengths in front of Torrenzino and Slane. Magnus Spin, can it keep going? 100 metres to go. Yes, it can keep going. It's going to bolt in. Magnus Spin has won it easily from Slane, Torrenzino, and Superstock runs 4.
I happened to be in Melbourne for that one. It turns out that if your creature wins at the Valley, there's this special room for winning owners, even if all you actually own is maybe one hoof, in which you may help yourself to as much champagne and as many sausage rolls as you can yam before the next race starts, and you're sent away with a special lapel badge which you can wear next time you're feeling especially insufferable. There is, regrettably, no such bonanza today. Magnuspin starts brightly, as he usually does, and seems a well-positioned second at the home turn, but this time when they hit the top of Moonee Valley's short straight, his afterburners are conspicuously absent.
50 metres to go. 2 lengths Independent Road, Magnuspin, then Bel Toro, Banker's Choice. Can it see it through? 50 metres to go. Promises kept us out late. Banker's Choice in front and 1.
He gets a bit buried in the last 150 metres or so and finishes 6th. Clad in metaphorical barrel with straps, I waddle back to where the screens in the lounge are showing races from elsewhere in the country and hope that the 30-1 debutante at Gilgandra will cover my airfare. And that is all for this edition of the Monocle Daily. Thanks to our panellists today, Terry Stiastny and Charles Hecker. The show was produced by Laura Kramer and researched by Maisie Ringer. Our sound engineer was Steph Chungu. I'm Andrew Mueller here in London. The Daily returns at the same time tomorrow. Thanks for listening.